Hello, my name is Melynee Naegele, and I am a teacher in Claremore, Oklahoma. I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math enrichment or math RTI intervention. And this year I started using the 4Hs created by Dr. Jamal Matthews, and I have been so very happy with it. I start the school year doing what I call a Unit Zero, and on the very first day, I introduced my students to what I call Take Five, which is just something that we do at our school. We use a character building program called Great Expectations, and we have a time where we call it Take Five or Call to Excellence. And with that, we have our school creed, and we say that as a school during our morning announcements. We don't say it in our classrooms. And I start by asking my students if they have any celebrations that they would like to share with the class. And then we have a quote of the month that we say in our classrooms as a recitation. And then we have a life principle of the week. And in my classroom, I share what that life principle is and what it means. And we have an enriched vocabulary word each week. And I share what that means and tie it to our life principle. And then to not just have these words hanging out there, I then go on and pick another quote of the day that I take from the Mr. Brown's precept that comes from the book Wonder. And so there's a separate book that has these quotes. And this quote is from Nelson Mandela. And I typically pick these from the book, just they come each day. And if it doesn't match, then I find one. And sometimes I will search around for these quotes depending on what my students are going through. And so if the quote doesn't match the life principle or the what my students need for that day, I may change the quote, but typically the quotes do a really good job of just falling with what my students need. And then I pick what I call an ingenious influencer. And so my ingenious influencers reflect the life principle and the quote of the day, but then I am very picky about my ingenious influencers. And with the 4-H's, it has lent another aspect of who my ingenious influencers are. Because I have used the 4-H's, I have gotten an insight from my students. And so I pick my ingenious influencers based on my students' heroes, one of their 4-H's. And I also pick ingenious influencers, not only their heroes, but also from people who have the same culture or the same interests or the same backgrounds. So I take the information of my students' 4-H's and I find similar stories. So not just their heroes, but people who have similar stories that can connect my students. And so that's one way to connect really amazing people with my students. And sometimes the people that I pick are people that look like my students and who come from similar backgrounds or people that have similar stories. And the reason why I do this is I have another friend, um, Luis Rivera, who has um, taught us about helping people see and connect with people, interpersonal and intergroup contacts, so that it helps reduce bias. And so I pick people to highlight to um, help my students connect with people who get windows and mirrors. And so sometimes there are people who look like and who don't look like. And so that's who my ingenious influencers are. And then I have another inspiring quote from that person. And then from there, we go into our daily routine. And so that's how I start my year. And so I have this whole wall in my classroom of different ingenious influencers. As the year goes on, I ask my students who they want on this wall. And sometimes my students get on this wall. So sometimes whenever my students go on, I will ask them, if you're okay with me putting you on my wall when you leave. And so some of these people on this wall are former students, and a lot of these people are my math friends and real people in the real world, and I talk about them, and so these people become my students' friends too. So how did I use the 4-H's in my classroom this year? At the beginning of the year at Meet the Teacher Night, I gave the 4-H's just to my parents, and I asked them to take the paper home and as a family sit down and talk about it with each other, and then pick the 4 questions and pick just the 4 that they wanted to, and as a family just fill that out and send it back to school. I didn't have time to sit down and individually interview them, and so then and I asked them to tell me one thing that their child was an expert in. So I got from a parent's perspective about their home. And then I knew I wanted more information. And so then I had this slide deck that I had the outline of the 4-H's, and I went over what they were with the students. And then I asked my students to pick 4 of the questions and then the one required question to respond. And then I gave them a paper to respond to that. And then as I read those, then I asked them follow up questions as I could. And again, I used that. One thing that I did, I talked about Luis a little bit, and he talked to a group that I'm working with about a life values self affirmation writing prompt, and I followed the 4-H's up with this. And students identify top 3 things that they value in their life from this list, and they write them down on a piece of paper, and then they pick the top thing from that list, and they describe why that value is important to them and why it matters to them, and then describe a situation in which that it proved especially meaningful to them. And what Louise has found is that when students do this, that achievement improves in like in assessments and the outcome. And so this also, when students did this gave me another insight into them, which then I was also able to incorporate into. So um, I didn't actually sit down with the 4-H's and tie this specifically to my standards, but because I had all of this insight with my students that when we were doing the math, I could tie the math to the students' stories. So then at the beginning of the year, after we had done all of these things, I asked my students to go through this reflective process to set some goals. And I asked them to reflect on the previous year of when they had a growth mindset, when they didn't have a growth mindset, and then the outcomes of that. And I asked them to set 3 goals for themselves for the year and to pick a life principle that would help them guide them, and a quote, and then a person that would inspire them to reach their goal. And then we created a poster. This is my poster. It's my bulletin board that's by my computer in the classroom. And then what we did was we wrote a letter to ourselves about how we would reach that goal and why we wanted to reach that goal. And I had a little prompt letter and some examples for them. And then we put that letter on the back of our poster, and I put it in an envelope, and we hung it on our wall in our classroom to remind us of our goals and our inspiration for that. And then after winter break, we got our posters down and we went through this process again, and we did the 4-H's again, and it gave me some more insight, and I saw how my students had changed. We did the self-affirmation writing again, and it gave me some more insight, and my students read their letters to themselves and wrote another letter to themselves. And something that is really, really, really amazing and really cool, we have one more week of school, and my boys in my last hour class said to me, Mrs. Naegele, can we please do that again before we leave the school year? And they want to go through this process again and do the 4-H's again, write another self affirmation letter to themselves, and then go through the goal writing process again and and make another poster themselves with their ingenious influencer on it, their life principle, and their goals, and hang it on their bedroom wall. I think this process not only gives teachers great insight, but it helps kids find their identity. It helps kids recognize their heroes and find people and words and quotes and inspiration. And it's really amazing to see that process and to have the students ask for it. And to value it. It's just been an amazing thing that I'm glad has become a part of my practice, and I'm looking forward to making it better as I use it and learn to use it better and make it more part of my practice. So thank you, Jamal, for sharing it with my team and my team sharing it with me. And if you have any insight to me and for me to making it better, I would love to hear it. So thank you for this opportunity.